Okay, good evening, folks. Welcome to the uh, January program of the Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society. It promises to be a very special one. I'm Andy Mason. I'm one of the co-presidents of the organization, and you'll meet Becky Gretton, the other co-president, shortly. I did want to just run down a few announcements of our upcoming events. Our next presentation in February 4th will be on, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, February. We're in January. Yeah, February will be no, this is actually a workshop on HELP, which stands for Habitats and Ecosystems for Landscape Professionals. And that's something we did last year. It's an outreach to landscape professionals to encourage them to use native and natural plants in their work. And I'm going to ask Susan O'Hanley, who's organizing this, to speak a little bit more about it.
Thank you. Yeah, the February 3rd program is going to be a 1 hour informational session about that 3 day course. The course will take place in March 10th through 12th at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, and we'll review landscape principles and how landscaping and lawn service businesses can offer new premium services to clients. It's an endorsement program, so endorsed ecoscapers that complete the course and the requirements have a number of different benefits and help in promoting some of their services in our region through National Audubon as well as through our partners. We're partnering this year with Otsego County Conservation Association and the Home Earth Alliance, which is also located in the Albany area, and they host a native plant farm. Imagine Native Plant Farm, and they're just a wonderful resource, and I'm really excited to bring them into the program. Professional continuing education units are provided as part of the program, and the information session is Tuesday, February 3rd at 6 p.m. It's about an hour long. We do require registration, and information is found right on the homepage when you go to doas.us, which is our website. There's a link in the important announcements section that basically will give you some overview for that. So we have the information session, we have the 3 day course. We're also accepting sponsorships and underwriters for some of the expenses for that program, and there's information there as well. So please share with landscapers that you work with or lawn services providers, as well as some business owners in our area. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, and back to Andy.
Thanks, Susan. Also in February, the weekend of February 12th, there's a great backyard bird count, which is an activity organized by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it involves basically just counting the birds in your backyard or in any one location for the weekend. And you can get more information about that from the Cornell Lab or at our website, doas.us. The February program will be on, I think, pretty fascinating topic, bird nests, the architecture of bird nests. Something that's always fascinated me, these creations that birds create, that the birds are able to build. And so that'll be Ann Swaim on February 20th, also at 7:30, also a Zoom program. And then if you want to look ahead to March public program on the 20th. Uh, it'll be a program on Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge out in Western New York. And I know many people have visited there. We've done field trips there, and we have one coming up this spring. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to see birds and to experience, the beauty of migration. So that's the March program. Um, so I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Gretton to introduce our speaker. I do want to mention if you have questions about the program or to ask Kyle, please put them in the chat box at the bottom of this.
Andy, let's
Yes.
put him in the Q and let's put him in the Q&A, please.
Oh, okay. That sounds even
Yep.
better. Q&A, yes. Um, yeah, so that will be, and then when we get to the end, we'll go through those and get responses. Okay, thanks. Becky, it's up to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Um, our speaker, Kyle Dudgeon, is an award-winning filmmaker and nature photographer based in Bozeman, Montana. After earning a degree in the environmental sciences in his home state of New York, Kyle's dream of exploring conservation stories through photography and film landed him in the Intermountain West in 2019. He is particularly drawn to the relationship between humans and birds and how each work to navigate a changing world. We are so pleased to welcome Kyle.
Thanks so much, Becky. I've changed that bio 3 times over the last year, from relationships with birds back to mammals, back to birds, back to mammals, and back to birds, based on what project I'm working on, um, in space and time. So, thanks everybody for joining me tonight. Of course, thank you to DOAS. You folks are so wonderful. Um, Created so many just great opportunities for me while I was in school, starting with when Andy wrote a letter to to SUNY Oneonta to get me my truck on campus because I wasn't allowed to have a car. We had never even met before, but um, Andy was doing
Yeah,
me
I thought you
favors
might be
already.
scamming me.
Yeah, then I showed up at the Hawk Watch, and that was all good. So yeah, I'm Kyle Dudgeon. I'm going to present tonight about a few things. My goal is to tell you a little bit about myself, then tell you a bit about Yellowstone, and then the best I can to advocate for some of the critters that bring me joy, and I think bring us all joy out here in the Western United States, including this grizzly bear friend. Uh-oh, let's see. There we go. I got to click. So to start it off, this is a picture that was taken of me this summer in Yellowstone. So for the last 5 years now, I've been a naturalist interpretive guide, which is a funny way of saying tour guide, in Yellowstone National Park. My role has been to take folks from all over the world out into our wonderful, thriving Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, primarily to show them wolves and grizzly bears and bison and all the things. Um, I've had some wonderful opportunities along the way to work for the park itself on the Yellowstone Wolf Project, and that's kind of what's going on here. Is I'm using my experience as a field tech who did many necropsies, which is essentially an evaluation of a dead animal to try and determine its cause of death, to break down this random bison carcass that my group and I had found that day, um, just east of Lamar Valley. But before I can jump right into Yellowstone, we got to back up a little bit and do some talking about my roots. So this is a picture I took when I was in high school, in my backyard, or actually in the forest adjacent to my backyard at my neighbor's property, but she was so kind to let me go wandering through. Um, I'm sure you folks in the Northeast will know that this is an oven bird. They're less common out here in the West, but when I look at some of these older songbird images that I had taken back in the day, they mean more to me now than they ever have before. And I think a theme that I've been drawing on in my life recently has been to not only remember your roots, but to recognize that there's nature all around us, be it a small little woodlot adjacent to your backyard in New York, that you can see as a circle on a map with a satellite picture, or the place I find myself now, which is the heart of the Rocky Mountains. They're obviously two completely different scales, but you know, when I was young and I walked into the forest and I couldn't see out of it, it felt like you were in an entirely different world. Um, and again, I find myself going back to that concept a lot these days. Um, I had such a blast looking through through hard drives trying to find old images of myself for this presentation. This photo was taken likely in 2014, I want to say. I was in high school. Um, I don't know why, but I remember that my sister took this picture. I drug her out into the woods one evening because I was really excited. A friend had keyed me in on a place to find a bird called a prairie warbler. That if you had asked, you know, this version of Kyle, even probably 6 months prior to when this photo was taken, I would not have known what a prairie warbler was, and I probably wouldn't have cared what a prairie warbler was. But uh, my early fascination with birds was kind of it began with raptors, and this was the beginning of me kind of like making my way into the guidebooks and learning that hey, there's a lot more species than just red-tailed hawks and bald eagles flying around our backyards. But um, so yeah, I took my sister up to this spot, and I just have to comment on my outfit. I know this is probably not what you'd find in the wildlife photographer starter pack for what to wear. Um, I was it was an interesting phase of life between most of my time having been spent outside was on baseball fields and playing soccer with my friends, and then suddenly here I was trying to transition into taking photos of birds and wildlife and all that. So the clothing and the outdoor gear caught up later. Um, but this is a prairie warbler here. I took this photo sometime around when that last one of me was taken. Um, and as my fascination again grew away from, I guess, past and through raptors and into the rest of the avian realm, I I found myself kind of increasingly just in awe of these little guys. Here's a bird, it spends probably 3, 4 months of its life in New York, and then the rest of it's spent down in or sorry, of its calendar year in New York. The rest of its calendar year is spent down in the Caribbean, feeding on insects where it stays warm and all that. And here it was, um, 10 minutes from my house, but they weren't everywhere around the house, right? It was you had to go to this one power cut on this very familiar trail in our town, and for all those years leading up to 16, 17, however old I was in that picture, I had no idea that this world existed. And um again, once I kind of turned that corner, it became just full on addicted. And then suddenly, the places that I started off taking my camera on walks to, this one particular place I'm going to talk about here is called the Liberty Loop, part of the Walkill River National Wildlife Refuge. Again, 10 minutes from home. Um, Suddenly you could walk that same path in May and June, and you'd see different birds there, obviously, than you would in December and January. And then once in a while, you'd see something like a least bittern, which is this bird here that, I think the only other one I've ever seen besides this one was on some very niche spot along the the Jersey Shore. Um, Again, all because this system around us is just birds are moving through it, and we have the opportunity to go out and kind of experience these places and these species as they come and go. Um, so yeah, I'm skipping over a lot here, but as I kind of got more fascinated and excited about photography, the adventures got a little bit bigger. I was going further north, further, east and west. I think I spent way too many days down on the south end of Whole Gate on Long Beach Island chasing snowy owls around. A good friend of mine introduced me to this spot as well up in the Adirondacks, photographing common loons. I'd never known what a common loon was prior prior to that introduction that was made for me. And then again, the images, they just kept getting better, kept motivating me to get out there, see what else was new. And suddenly, New York felt a little bit bigger because I had the Adirondacks checked off um, on my list. And again, the images kept getting better, more time spent out, kind of learn your camera, you learn time of day, time of year, all those things. And again, like 10 minutes from my house, there's northern harriers flying around, all these wonderful opportunities to photograph. So the stage was set pretty much by the time I was moving into college, and obviously going up to Oneonta and spending time just learning about species and cameras and all that stuff. But um, before I get right to the Yellowstone chapter, I just want to show this picture. Out of all the pictures I've ever taken at the Liberty Loop, this one might be my favorite, and I took it this past summer. My mom. Um, I don't bring cameras home anymore, uh, hardly ever, because I feel like that chapter is kind of behind me. I'd way rather take binoculars out and observe the species um, and whatnot that I became so fond of when I was young. I bought mom a pair of binoculars for her birthday, or for her birthday, and she was all excited to get out. So we went to the loop and had a walk. And I think in this particular image, she's looking at an indigo bunting. Um, but every time I'm home, just this most recent trip over the holidays, I go back to these places, especially um, this Liberty Loop, because again, I I kind of like I revel in how special they were to me back then, but I think even more so now, I'm realizing that the value in these places that you grow up around and that are close to your home, that aren't as big and epic and wild as some of the places that you come to know in other parts of your life. I skipped over a note that I had here um, to talk about a quote from a friend who's an artist. His name's Max Romy, and he actually lives in Alaska along the coast. And he's an artist. He paints watercolors of Alaska, the mountain ranges and stuff. But one thing he said many years ago really stuck with me, and it was a project that he had essentially painted in watercolors a lot of the birds that he would see in his hometown in Alaska throughout the year. And what he said, and the whole premise of this quote was, why travel the world, or why travel around to see the world when the whole world comes to me? Essentially, I'm botching that, of course, but what he was getting at is these species that migrate thousands of miles throughout a calendar year, like they were essentially seeing the world for Max and bringing it back to Alaska every year on their migration, um, which I thought was pretty cool. So I got my first introduction to Yellowstone um, in 2017. A college roommate up in Oneonta, we decided one August that we were going to turn his little pickup truck west and drive 2,000 miles to go visit a buddy who was working in Yellowstone. Um, this picture was taken along that trip at some point. I think I'm up top of Mount Washburn, which is the highest point that you can actually get on the road in the park. You can see my gear got a bit of an upgrade. At least I have a sun hoodie on and a water bottle in my backpack. So I'm evolving in a way as a wildlife photographer. Still a long way to go. Um, but I was obviously blown away by this landscape, as anybody is. We were all sitting in a room together. This is when I'd ask how many of you have actually been to Yellowstone, and I know some hands would go up. Um, when you look at a map of the United States, specifically the lower 48, there are certain things that stand out, and Yellowstone National Park is one of those things. And again, beyond Yellowstone, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the title of this program, is kind of this giant chunk of green that encompasses the park and so many of our towns and cities here out in Montana and Wyoming. Um, it's a wonderful place, and when I landed there officially in 2019, I was blown away, and I spent all of my free time driving in circles trying to see wildlife. and um, a lot of that was, it was learning, right? When I first took this picture, I thought it was a grizzly bear because I had no idea. Like, what does a kid from New York who is exploring the West for the first time know about bear species? Not all that much. Um, but slowly, I learned the animals and the birds and the place. You know, Before long, it honestly felt like I knew it so well that there were places picked out on the map where I could go and photograph certain things like bison calving. Yep, know right where to go. We're going to go to the east end of Lamar Valley first week of May. We're going to get our bison calf photos or um, oh gosh, yeah, great gray owls. We're going to go down to the lake and spend literally an enormous chunk of our free time looking for great gray owls. All those sorts of things. Um, and then before long, actually, very recently, I had this realization that I I've spent over a year of my life in Yellowstone, and if you had asked me if I'd ever seen that as a possibility 5, 10 years ago, I would have told you were crazy. But here we are, like all these years later. Um, we're gonna dip away from the park itself for a second here. I want to just talk about owls for a second because I can't tell a story about how I came to know and love Yellowstone without talking about great gray owls because that really was a huge gateway for me, and a lot of the work I'm doing today actually. I I became head over heels for this species. I say it all the time. It's getting a little redundant now, but I this idea would not leave my brain. It still doesn't leave my brain of if you live in a place and there's a species that also lives there, like what is your excuse for not, if you're able to, of course, what is your excuse for not being able to find that species? Like there was no distance I wasn't able to walk to look for great gray owls. And I began in Yellowstone and became utterly obsessed. Well, I couldn't be in Yellowstone every day of the week because I had to work a job and pay rent. I ended up settling in Bozeman, Montana, which is about 90 minutes north of Yellowstone. And on my weekends, I went straight charging back to Yellowstone for a while. But it was during the year of the pandemic I really started to focus on less so on the park itself and more so on the areas around Bozeman because instead of driving hundreds of miles to go look for owls in the woods, and they closed the park for a couple months during that time anyway. I I decided to pivot and look in the woods, closer to town, and I had some luck right away. And as that luck would have it, I walked into my first conservation story unknowingly, because gosh, I'm skipping hundreds of hours of efforts I made here to actually track this species down. But when I finally got around to finding a great gray owl nest, which is, if you don't know, the like the needle in the needle in the needle in the haystack of wild things out here. Immediately, the first nest I found was like right smack in the middle of a commercial logging project, and yeah, immediately I was forced to, transition away from just being an observer and got right on the advocacy side of things to save these little guys and not only this specific summer, but for the remainder of time. And through the efforts of myself and um, some other friends, we were able to have a small section of these old growth Douglas fir trees set aside for the owls. There's a film made about that, or I made a film about that called "The Trees with Orange Rings." You can check it out on YouTube. Um, but I needed to include this because it's part of the overall goal I'm trying to achieve with this talk, and that's because just because we have the national park, we've again 2 million acres of national park here, very close to where I'm sitting right now. Um, it does not mean that all of these species are protected against development, against hunting, this, that, and the other forever, right? We have a 20 million acre ecosystem that most of which is on public accessible land, be it national forest, BLM, large wilderness areas where there's a little bit, or I guess, better preservation um, rules and whatnot around preservation, resource extraction, that sort of thing. Uh, but I got very motivated, and this motivation has not left me to turn my conservation brain away from the park, which is this very popular place for good reason, right? And focus on the wildlife and the birds kind of in our backyards that don't have the same protections as those inside the park do. And the fact that I can look at this picture and know exactly where it was taken and know that both of these big trees that this owl is sitting in, that it lived amongst, no longer exist is what I believe to be a sad thing, right? There's no commercial logging or anything that goes on in Yellowstone. But again, you take a step across this invisible line of a park boundary where all of the same wildlife, all the same birds, all of it exists in very similar ways and it's functioning the same way. But the protections are stripped. So that is where my work has kind of led me today. Now, I'm going to end this talk on a story about a wolf, but I do want to touch on grizzly bears quick. And I just want to say, I'm not here to solve the world's problems. I'm merely, just a messenger, if you would. Just trying to do what I can for these things. But spending all this time in the park over the last 5 years, you learn a thing or two, and you talk to a few of the biologists, and you talk to the folks who sit on the other side of the line that don't want things like grizzly bears walking around or wolves, or they want to be able to harvest the timber and cut firewood and all those things. So we have a very intricate web of humans out here, and I think it's important to know that, like anything, the wildlife, nature, ecology, it's all going to do what it's going to do. It's the humans that um, we have to find a middle ground on. So grizzly bears. So similarly, when a grizzly bear is in Yellowstone National Park, it doesn't have to worry about anything really, except for the hundreds of onlookers that come and enjoy them kind of throughout the summer season for good reason. They are such an incredible animal. Um, I think as the years have gone on, I've just learned to appreciate bears, especially grizzly bears, more. I was so fixated on owls, you guys, when I first came out here, that it was wonderful to see things like grizzlies and wolves and whatnot. Um, but I drove by a lot of those things to find my way through the woods looking for owls. But again, when a grizzly bear is inside of Yellowstone National Park, it's pretty well protected. Um, However, they don't stay inside Yellowstone National Park, right? So our population of grizzlies right now in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is somewhere between 800 and 1,100 bears, they say, which is a pretty good number. There's parts of that range that are kind of cut out for specific monitoring reasons. There's probably more than 1,100 bears is what I'm trying to get at here. Um, and although we don't have major metro areas like your East Coast megalopolis, right? Your big cities from Boston all the way down to, I think, Baltimore, DC is the southern end of that. Don't quote me. Um, we still have human areas, right? And what do the bears do when it's fall and they're looking for food and it's becoming more and more scarce out on the landscape? Well, they go wandering. It's just what bears do. Uh, this is an image I captured this summer as part of a larger project I'm working on that includes a documentary, as well as some photo stories as well, of a young grizzly bear, subadults, probably a 3 or a 4 year old. Obviously, this bear's been in the hands of a human before. It's got 2 ear tags, But this bear was wandering through the Gardner Basin. So one thing I don't have in this presentation is a map, and that probably would have been pretty helpful. Um, but a bear that leaves Yellowstone and goes north runs into people pretty quickly, especially if it goes northwest. So we have a little town on the northwest corner of the park called Gardner. It's got 900 year-round residents. Um, the visitor population through Gardner in a calendar year, which largely comes between the beginning of May and the end of October, is somewhere around 1 million people. So that town really only exists today because of the park, right? It's a tourism-based community. Uh, these bears wander right into Gardner and right into our stuff. Um, and do they get into trouble? Absolutely. Whether it's a trash bag that somebody didn't secure, or it's a chicken coop that has free ranging chickens walking around town. Um, Trash can without a secured lid, right? Or your apple trees in your backyard. There's so many different food sources for these bears that they need to utilize on their trip to hibernation, which is getting pushed further and further um, into the late fall and early winter months due to climate change. So they inevitably come across our things, right? Um, there's going to be a bear walking into frame here in a second. So part of this advocacy angle that I try to push, and not only myself but some others, many others as well, including someone I'm pretty close to, my colleague and boss, I should say. I want to say business partner, Evan Stout, who's doing some of the grizzly conflict work here in Gardner. The message we're trying to get through to people is like, hey, you're coming to Yellowstone National Park to see these bears and wolves and see all of the wonders that we have here on the natural landscape. Let's do these animals a favor and keep our things inside or secured. And how do you relay that message to 1 million people? We're working on that, especially in a community where there aren't any rules. It's unincorporated, right? So you have again, with the human aspects, you have a um, bunch of different things coming together. You have folks that live in the West because it's the West. It's still wild. There's no rules, right? You have folks coming here because they want to experience all of the wonders of a place like Yellowstone and see all the wildlife that were here in 1491 that are still here today and thriving. Try to put people from both sides of that story in the same room and have them agree on anything. It's quite difficult. All the while, the animals are just being animals. They get into trouble. They interact with humans in the landscape. Bears attack people. Bears sometimes kill people, right? So we have a pretty tricky situation on our hands. But at the end of the day, the easiest way to make a difference is to make a simple shift in what you do with your trash, or what you do with what you do, or not having a chicken coop in a place like Gardner on the edge of Yellowstone National Park, right? Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. And then we haven't even talked about um, the thousands of acres of private ranches that run from Yellowstone all the way to the Canadian border along the Rocky Mountain front. So there's a big complex issue, and I hesitate to even scratch the surface of it here. Um, but again, all the advocacy work that we're taking part in is really to just tell the story how it is. On one side of this invisible line that these animals have no idea exists, all the protections are there. On the other side, they're on a largely human landscape, though to them it doesn't look like that. Um, and the rules and regulations for both them and us, as well as us, they change, right? This bear right here is a big male. He's a big dominant grizzly bear, as healthy as they come for a male grizzly on the northern range of Yellowstone Park. Well, he got exposed to human trash a couple times throughout his life, um, until the last or summer of 2024, where he decided that in June, also known as the most productive month to be a bear on the landscape, everything you could possibly want to eat as a bear is growing in June. It's our wettest, most productive year for plants and vegetation. There's calves on the landscape, you name it. Um, well, this bear decided, no, none of that natural food stuff is worthwhile. I'm going to go into Gardner and see what I can get. Um, and he got a lot. He ate a lot of food and unfortunately had to be lethally removed. Um, and a lot of the backyards that he was eating out of were folks who own and operate businesses on the edge of Yellowstone, profiting because of Yellowstone. So you can kind of see what I'm getting at here. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer story. Um, a few months ago, amidst the greater conversation around wolves that's going on, I decided to say a few words, and I wrote a story based about my experiences with this individual right here, um, with an angle on conservation that I believe resonated with folks quite well. I'm going to try and tell that story right now. Um, I want to thank my buddy Michael Sipniewski for this video, as well as one more of a very special wolf whose research identifier was 1228F. So if you don't know that there are wolves running around Yellowstone, you got to do some reading because this is big news, and it's been big news since the 90s when they were reintroduced after humans completely eradicated them from the lower 48 in the early 1900s by some pretty crazy mechanisms, if you would, from poison to, you know, baiting them out of dens with giant fish hooks that would get lodged in their stomachs, to lighting dens on fire, to having essentially a war on this animal that we now, spend so much of our time with in our homes in the dog version, right? Um, but wolves have been back and present on the landscape here for, oh gosh, was it 31 years, I guess, since the wolf reintroduction happened in Yellowstone in 1995. It'll be this spring. Um, but now more than ever, I guess, yeah, now more than ever, we're seeing the attitudes towards wolves at just all-time highs and all-time lows. You either love them or you hate them. There's no middle ground. Um, but let's turn this a little bit back towards my story here as I'm getting ahead of myself. So when I first came to Yellowstone, uh, obviously I knew there were wolves here. I had a really cool interaction with a wolf, my first wolf sighting ever, in that first summer that I spent out here in 2018 that I'll remember forever. Um, and I used to see him on the landscape pretty consistently, as you do, and you spend time in especially northern Yellowstone. But this wolf in particular, 1228, at the time I took this picture, um, she was a yearling, so she was about one year old. This was the closest I had ever been to a wild wolf in my life, and she crossed the road right in front of my friend and I, and turned into the sagebrush, looked at us before carrying on her way. Moments later, there's a photo from that same encounter of her kind of running through all the lupine, the wolf flower, which is kind of ironic. Um, but 1228 was a wolf that left an impression on me. And I think with a species like a wolf, and again, we all have interacted with dogs in our lives. With a species like a wolf, you kind of have to have one of those wow moments to really begin thinking about them, I think, in a different way, or at least I did. And I remember being quite moved by this particular encounter, and especially, having a camera, being able to look back at this photo, kind of just remember the moment and all the emotion, right? Um, and shortly after this encounter, I actually got a job as a guide. So I mentioned earlier, I kind of settled in Bozeman in 2019, and I was working at an outdoor store, a couple of them actually, kind of through the first year and a half of my time in Bozeman, just again to pay the bills and be able to explore on the weekends and uh, yeah, experience, Montana. I didn't move here because it's a mediocre place to live. Like it is just amazing out here. And all of my free time I was running around that this place and just falling in love with it. So um shortly after this encounter, which happened on one of those days that I wasn't working, um I got a job as a guide, and that was something I really needed at that point in my life. I was looking for the next big step. I'd applied to jobs in Alaska, and I was probably going to leave had COVID not shut down that whole ordeal. But um, I became a guide, and for that first year of guiding, when you're super green and you're trying not to let your clients of the day know that you've only been doing this for however many months. And of course, I have the credentials with my environmental degree from SUNY Oneonta to be able to talk about ecosystems and all that stuff, and had the knowledge on Yellowstone by this time. I'd read books. I'd spent a good amount of time there. Um, but 1228 would always appear. Like she was probably the most visible wolf in Yellowstone for that first year of me guiding out on the landscape, and that was super helpful, right? We're selling bear and wolf tours here to people. Like you want to see grizzly bears and wolves, and we were seeing her a lot of days. So, um, obviously, I had remembered that first encounter that I had with 1228, where she crossed the road and looked right into my camera lens and teary eyed, or sitting there like, what just happened? Um, but my next very memorable encounter, and there were a handful of them over the years, came in June that following year when I was guiding, and I had a family out, and we were watching her in the valley that morning. And she was traveling as wolves do in the summer. They spend a lot of time going back and forth, especially when they have den sites with puppies that need to be fed. Um, these particular wolves, they had to kill about 10, 12 miles from their den that day. In 1228, we caught her traveling back towards the den site with spotting scopes way down in the bottom of Lamar Valley. Um, but on her little foray back to the den, she stopped in the grass and she was sniffing around for a second. And when she emerged, she had this big white bison femur uh, in her mouth, just like a dog, right? That's exactly what is going on here. But she still had a long ways to go, and she obviously knew that she was going back to the den. I, being the guide with all the knowledge, right, in my first 4 months on, not even first 3 months uh, at this position, I was like, she's going to the den. Um, and sure enough, she was, and she carried that bone the final 6 or 8 miles or whatever it was. And when the wolves are traveling through Lamar Valley, going back to their den site at Slough Creek, there comes a moment when they disappear from our view shed. And what you have to do is you get back in your vehicle, you pack your scopes up, and you drive around on the road to the campground. You pull off, find another vantage point, set up there, and you look out at the den. And the timing worked out perfectly. By the time I think I had a family that day with a couple kids, and of course, someone had to use the restroom on the way over, right? By the time we got everybody out of the vehicle, had all our situations sorted out, climbed up on the hill, had our scope set out across the valley, looking out across the valley towards the wolf den. Here comes 1228 with this bone, and she dropped it off for those puppies. And let me tell you, it's just like giving a dog a treat at the end of a long day when you haven't seen them. When a yearling or an adult wolf comes back to a den site with a gift as grand as this one, it's a special thing to witness. So again, those moments they kind of stuck with me, as they would with anybody, right? Um, if you had asked me in the middle of those early years of guiding who my favorite wolf was, tell me a story about a wolf, it was always involving 1228. Like she was, again, just such a visible presence out in the landscape. we kind of all had these guesses that when she hit 2 years old and it was time to disperse, so she would reach sexual maturity, that she would set up her own pack. Like she would leave the comfort of her Junction Butte pack family and try and do her own thing. And that's exactly what she did. She spent about 3 months over the course of, I want to say, December, January, February, kind of leading right up to the wolf breeding season, which is actually going on right now. It's usually between mid-January and mid-February. Um, and she howled and howled and howled, and we would watch her like sitting up on hills and howling. And then, sure enough, one day this black male wolf showed up, and nobody had any idea who he was. And again, we have wolves in Yellowstone. We got roughly 100 of them is the population, the consistent population number from year to year. But beyond the park border, up into the mountains, especially in this northeast part of Yellowstone, there's a giant wilderness area that borders the park. There's wolves present there as well. There are wolves all over the Rockies now. So it didn't take long for her to howl in this male, and he was pretty shy. He was not as present and bold as she was out on the landscape. But sure enough, they bred. They had puppies that first year. 2022 was the first litter that they had. Um, and immediately let me get my timeline right here. They had puppies in spring. Immediately that May, June, um, he went out into Wyoming and got shot by a hunter. So we don't know how many pups they had in the den that season, but 1228, by some miracle, wolves are incredibly resilient. Um, she raised puppies on her own, and by that following fall, there were uh, five of them. There were four pups and her. If you guys, there's going to be a link provided to the story I wrote that has all the proper numbers. So please don't quote me on any of this. I didn't do my homework. Um, but anyway, 1228 and her puppies, without their founding alpha male, they kind of um, continued on their way in their territory that became Northeast Yellowstone, and they were called the Shrimp Lake Pack by the Yellowstone Wolf Project because little shrimp lakes sat right in their territory, um, which is a named for these little aquatic scuds that form in great abundance in this one little lake. Anyway, not that important. Um, Fortunately for 1228, she would find another mate that following winter. They would have another litter of pups the spring of 2023. Um, but things kind of changed after that litter because they became a lot more secretive. And a lot of us guess that they became secretive due to what happened to their founding alpha male, right? Obviously, we can't speak wolf, we can't ask them, but you could probably imagine, that's a pretty traumatic thing to have happen, and also a detriment to a wolf pack when you lose the individual who's supposed to be providing all your food at a very critical time of year for not only yourself being his mate, but the mouths of however many hungry pups you have. And this stuff happens all the time. So we stopped seeing them. They kind of went dark. And her collar, she's got a radio collar on, obviously, in these images. Her collar stopped working at some point around that spring of 2023. So the Wolf Project couldn't continue to monitor her. Every once in a while, we'd hear a report from a visitor who was driving into the park from the northeast corner on the other side of Gardner, or from Gardner, that they might have seen a pack of wolves or one or two wolves. There was a collared female there, this, that, and the other. So collectively, the Wolf Project, as well as the wolf watching community and the guides, we kind of had an idea that these wolves had begun to move northeast. You leave the park very quickly when you set up a territory in the northeast corner if you continue to go northeast. For them, they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have much larger wolf packs west of their territory and south of their territory. And wolves are very territorial. If you're a pack of seven, you don't want to come across a foreign pack of 20 wolves. It's very dangerous for all of you. Um, to the north and to the east, they would run into people in the Sunlight Basin of Wyoming, or even before that, Cook City and Silvergate. The amount of hunting guiding outfits that exist out there. Everybody's all excited to go hunt elk, but they have their wolf tags in their back pocket just in case. Like those opportunities exist too. Um, so these wolves were kind of stuck, and Northeast Yellowstone in particular is it's somewhat of a wolf sink in that uh, they have to move eventually. The food is very limited there. So, long story short, you guys, you probably know where I'm going with this. Um, News started to float around the rumor mill that summer by I think August that a gray collared lactating female had been shot for depredating chickens in Wyoming's Sunlight Basin. Um, it was later, I believe, can't confirm. Um, it was later proven with DNA analysis that 1228, as well as a couple of her pack mates, were were shot for by a rancher um, for killing chickens. They might have killed a cow or two as well during their stint over there, and I could say a lot more about that, but I'll hold my thoughts for the moment. I want you all to imagine, if you haven't been to a place like Yellowstone, let's go back to what I said earlier in this presentation about the most wild place that you can think of in the lower 48. And if Yellowstone doesn't come to mind, I'm really curious to hear what your list comprises of. Um, Yellowstone is an enormous protected area. Again, 2.2 million acres of relatively undeveloped wilderness. It's a glorious piece of dirt, right? You can disappear for days. You can still today get an experience of what it's like to be completely removed from a human landscape um, when you really get into the heart of Yellowstone. But even being 2.2 million acres, having all the great protections that it does, I don't think Yellowstone is big enough. If a wolf that's born well within the national park gets shot the moment she leaves, or a grizzly bear on its normal foray in the fall, looking for resources, again, when they get slim on the natural landscape, can wander right into a town and get lethally removed for similar reasons, for getting into our human stuff. Um, and that to me is why I'm going to continue doing the work that I do, because we have a very special thing here. We really do. When you break it down and you look at all the wild places left in this country, on this continent, around the world, we have a very special thing, um, and we need to strike a balance between the human landscapes that we're all so familiar with and the wild country that still exists, that's not coming back once we get rid of it. And I want to leave you with a quote from the late, great Sigurd Olson. I read this book during my first summer in Montana. It was given to me by an Oneonta professor, or lent to me, Dr. James Mills. Still thank him for that. But Sigurd Olson was a nature writer based in northern Minnesota. He wrote about that Boundary Waters country that's so great up there. And this quote stuck with me. Sigurd wrote, "My runes have come from the wilderness, for in its solitude, silence, and freedom, I see more clearly those values and influences that over the long centuries have molded us as a race. I know there are moments of insight when ancient truths do stand out more vividly, and one senses anew his relationship to the earth and to all life. Such moments are worth waiting for." And they certainly are. And if you have not had the opportunity to go to Yellowstone in your life, I really do encourage you to come out. It's sure to leave a lasting impression on you, as it has to so many of us I think I did pretty good. Was that 45 minutes?
Yeah, good job. You're right on the money.
45 on the dot. Okay, good.
Wow.
Thank you all for sticking around. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you. A question, Kyle.
Sure.
Question from Kathleen. How do you actually find the owls? This is a good question.
Oh man. I don't think we have time for another presentation. The short answer to that is uh, learn the habitat and learn what the areas that they like to use that they need for their success. And in this part of the world, it's old growth forest with montane meadows and areas where it's wetter that provide prey for them. So voles and pocket gophers and those sorts of things, they eat green vegetation in the summer. And where do you find green vegetation when it starts to dry out on the natural landscape? You find that in wetter areas. But these wetter areas, they can't be in the bog in the middle of the town where there's no, you know, big old growth trees around. They have to all kind of come together. Great gray owl habitat is very specific. It's part of the reason why they're one of the first species that we're probably going to lose as land management continues the way it's going. But that's how you spend a lot of time looking at trees and not finding them, and then eventually it all makes sense. Hopefully.
Kyle, one of our participants was asking about cameras that you use. One question was, what did you use when you were such a young person, like taking a picture of that prairie warbler? And then what kind
Mhm.
of equipment do you use now?
Cameras are expensive, and when you're in high school and have no money, you do your best to get what you can. For me, it was Canon cameras. The more photographers I meet, we like to talk about our first camera, and for me, it was the Canon Rebel T3i, I think it was. And it seems like everybody along their photography journey started with a Canon Rebel or something similar from Nikon or Sony. Um, and as far as lenses go, honestly, whatever you can get your hands on. I remember I had the kit lens they call it that comes with the Canon Rebel was an 18 millimeter zoom. It was an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, and I was trying to take photos of hawks with 55 millimeter lens. And a couple times, I don't know how, you could actually see like their eyeball, and that blew my mind. And that was very much so the start of what continues to be an addiction. And today I'm still shooting Canon gear. Just the lenses and the bodies have gotten better and also way more expensive.
And what is a good time to go out to that area to see bears and grizzlies and so on?
Mhm. Uh, the best month to be in Yellowstone is the month of May 15th to June 15th. And you can quote me on that. And if you don't have a good time between May 15th and June 15th, please reach out to me and let me know what happened.
My brother wants to know. He says, you showed a video of a bear digging around in the turf. Do you know what the bear was foraging for?
I do. That bear was eating a plant called biscuit root. Um, Biscuit root is a highly nutritious. You can eat both the flower and the root, but the root is really what they dig for. It's I hope there's no botanists in this Zoom call right now because I'm about to botch this, but it's very similar to the closest comparison I draw is to like a wild carrot in a way. It's a very fatty, nutritious root. Um, Indigenous peoples ate them for a long time as a major part of their diet in this part of the world. When I'm out exploring and we come across some of it, we're digging it up and eating it as well. It's tasty to humans and bears. Um, there might have been a little bit of wild onion in that video as well. I was actually trying to figure out what exactly she was pulling on. Um, and I kind of blew over the grizzlies. That particular bear is a female. In that video, she's 3 years old, but she's still alive and well today. Uses the same territory. We see her very frequently throughout the summer. Um, and if you come to Yellowstone, you might get to see her as well.
Man.
Kyle, do you do photo tours for photo enthusiasts?
Mhm. Yes, yes, we do. Um, we do photo tours. Our company is shifting forms in a way. If you're interested in a photo tour, please reach out. There's an email or contact form on my website, and I can get you put in touch with the right people.
That's excellent.
I just want to
Okay.
jump in and say that I did put some links in the chat, um, the links to the article on Substack that Kyle had mentioned. I also listed Kyle's contact email and a link to the YouTube video that the trees with orange rings. So, and I'll get your website link and add that. I will have all these links along with the recording posted on the DOAS website next week. And everyone who registered will get notification. Just a reminder that that'll be online soon. I think the reminder goes out on Tuesday, but I might not actually have it online until Thursday.
Thank you, Susan.
Question from Cindy. Can you say more about your current work?
Mhm. Um, yes, absolutely. I'm currently working. I guess the thing that's taking up the most time right now is a documentary called Bear Proof about human grizzly coexistence and conflict on the Yellowstone border, which is something we touched on during this presentation. Um, that's a major project, something I'm very close to right now, and many folks around me are close to as well. Um, again, I can't really stress how grateful I am for these opportunities. I mean, I never would have imagined this is what I'd be doing right now, and there's still a lot of growth that I've yet to begin, in especially in filmmaking. But it's neat to learn about bears, to learn about wolves, to learn about these stories, and do my part in telling them, because there aren't enough people out there advocating for these species right now in the right ways. And I think the more help we can get, the better. You folks will probably be happy to know that I'm funding a documentary project right now that'll take place this fall about the start of hawk watching in the Western United States. Steve Hoffman was kind of the guy who pioneered uh, that effort and found flyways along the Rocky Mountain front. He's again someone who I'm very close to, and we're going to tell his story in a documentary film starting this fall.
Beautiful. Question from Tracy. Have you found more wolves to connect with?
Tracy, that's a good question. Um, I had a pretty cool encounter with a wolf this spring, uh, with another close friend that stuck with me, perhaps even more so than the first time I kind of came across 1228 in close proximity. But it's hard to tell who that wolf is because they aren't collared. And that's a big help to us as observers, even though I'm not standing around with radio telemetry, reading the collar data per se. you can observe a wolf pack and pick out the collared individuals and kind of know who they are. 1228's pack and her pack mates, when I was in my guiding prime a few years ago and those wolves were so visible, you could look out into a group of them and know exactly who was who. You could tell who the alpha male was. He didn't even have a collar, and just from observing them and whatnot. But yes, I haven't really found a wolf to connect with again. I don't really look for that. It kind of finds me in a way. But that one this spring was definitely trying for sure.
One listener is asking, have you been back to the condors?
Oh, condors. No, I haven't. I haven't been back to the condors. I cannot wait to go back to the condors. I think early 2027. I'm loosely planning a trip to go back down to Patagonia and see those birds and also some folks that I grew close to down there once
And for
again.
those who aren't aware of the what all of this, I'm sure Susan will put a little information on the recording too
Mhm.
regarding your condor experience.
Yeah, there's if you all go to my website under films, there's a film in there called To See the Sky, and it's about one of the leading experts on Andean condors in the world, who's my pseudo Argentine grandpa who lives down in Patagonia. His name is Lorenzo Simpson. Um, and I'm sure you'll enjoy seeing that beautiful landscape as well. That's a whole different presentation too.
Well, Kyle, thank you for a great presentation, and thank you for keeping your connection to Oneana. We're kind of honored to have such a successful individual spend time here and help out with our hawk watch, and you've gone on to a great career. And thank you also for your conservation work. Very important. So. I think that's it. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. And please come back in February for our next program. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
All right.